Boy, oh boy, there sure are a lot of Dungeons & Dragons games, and some of them are even good. With an IP as old as D&D, there has been plenty of time for games to be produced that vary in quality quite tremendously. Have you heard of Baldur's Gate 3? People love that game. Have you heard of Hillsfar? People hate that game. My favorite D&D game is Warriors of the Eternal Sun for the Sega Genesis, but I already did a video on that, so now I'm doing a video on my second favorite D&D game, Eye of the Beholder. And there are a lot of iterations of this title, but we're doing the PC version. I'd love to do the Sega CD version, but I don't have it in me to fight with the controls. Of note, that game has the best graphics of any version. It also has a one-of-a-kind soundtrack by Yuzo Koshiro not found in any other version of the game. Just imagine Killing Drow to the Streets of Rage soundtrack. Yeah, it's that good. And I'm gonna review all three of them, just not all at the same time. Eye of the Beholder, Eye of the Beholder 2, The Legend of Darkmoon, and Eye of the Beholder 3, Assault on Myth Drannor. As of writing this, I have only ever played the first game, so I have a lot to look forward to with Darkmoon being universally praised and Myth Drannor being universally panned. So, I'm Richard for RPG Fortress. Let's get into Eye of the Beholder. Doesn't matter what you say, or do what you read, you can do it your own way. This is such a source of pity, there's limited freedom of choices, liberty my friend. Freedom stages, what's the middle man? Freedom with an exception. Eye of the Beholder is a dungeon-crawling computer role-playing game published by SSI and developed by the legendary Westwood Associates. SSI had the Dungeons & Dragons license all to themselves for a very long time in the 80s and 90s, and they released a load of great titles, most of which were developed by Westwood Associates. While not the first ever first-person dungeon-crawling RPG, it definitely streamlined some of the systems of the granddaddy of the genre, Wizardry. Go back and tally up all the times I've talked about Wizardry on this channel and be surprised that it's literally in the billions. The game starts off with a pretty fun little bit of storytelling. There is a terrible evil underneath the town of Waterdeep, and you are tasked to go get rid of it. As your party enters the sewers, the player is privy to a scene showing that someone is scrying from a crystal ball watching the party. Then the roof collapses, trapping the party in the stinking sewers. As you wander the mazes below the city, you only really get a couple of story sequences. Keep in mind that the game is from 1991, so, you do get some fun environmental storytelling though. One of the first things you find in the sewers is a skeleton. You can pick up the skeleton and carry it around in your loot. You'll eventually meet a cleric who can resurrect the skeleton, and the character will actually join your party. There's a half dozen different skeletons located throughout the dungeon, and while you can only have 6 party members in total, it's really fun to see who these characters are and how they died. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. There's a whole load of gameplay we need to talk about before we get to the stage where your skeletons are resurrected. You start the game by making a party of 4, and goddamn, it's so much fun. Now, being an old D&D game, we are once again faced with using the advanced Dungeons & Dragons rule set. This is sometimes referred to as D&D 2nd Edition these days, but back then, it was just AD&D. These old rules are not nearly as flashy as today's D&D. You're not going to be playing a Tabaxi war priest, you're going to play a dwarf cleric, or an elven mage. This was simpler times, and that's okay. You're gonna get a lot of mileage out of a dwarf or an elf. On this playthrough, I made a half-elf fighter, human fighter, elven mage, and human cleric. Thieves and paladins don't really add too much to this game, and I don't normally multi-class. When I eventually get to recruit other characters, I go with Anya and Tira and give them both bows. This team will get you through most situations without any issues. Charisma, like most early D&D games, literally does nothing. Paladins are okay, and thieves are only good for picking locks, but they can only pick some of the early game locks. Also, when generating your character in this game, not only do you get infinite rerolls if that's your thing, but you can actually modify your stats in any way that you want to. So if you've got a D&D character that you use in an actual game, you can modify your character's stats to reflect that. Or you can just be a fucking goon and give everybody 18s and everything. So when you get your guys ready, you're right here in the sewers. Yay, it fucking stinks. First thing you want to do is enter into the menu and pray for spells and memorize spells. Clerics get their spells from a divine source, so they pray for them. Mages memorize their spells from a spell book, so they memorize them. It's basically the same thing, just differently named for lore reasons. Being D&D, you have the Vancian style of spells. You don't have MP, instead you can memorize X amount of spells per level. As you level, you can memorize more spells, and in whatever combination you want. Level 1 mage always gets full magic missiles, don't even at me. As your cleric gains levels, she'll gain new spells automatically. These are sent to her telepathically from her nameless god or whatever. You don't get to choose a god, it's just a nebulous godly being that you pray to. Kinda like in real life. Mages learn new spells by scribing scrolls that you find. Clerics can also get scrolls, but they don't scribe them, they're just one-off uses of spells. As you wander the sewers and beyond, you're gonna fight some damned monsters. Combat in Eye of the Beholder is kinda real-time, kinda turn-based at the same time. Everything kinda moves on its own, on a grid, but it's not quite as fluid as real-time. It does give you some interesting combat, though. You can attack an enemy and then immediately start backing up so they can't hit you back. You can dodge enemy arrows by manually moving out of the way. And you can prep big spells, turn a corner, let them loose, then immediately dodge back around the corner. Really fun stuff. Just keep in mind that enemies can use similar tactics against you. And if you don't pay attention to the surroundings, you can fall down a pit or get into a trap. As you traverse Stinktown, you will find lots of idiots to send to hell or wherever they go when they die. As you get deeper, the monsters get stronger. The first couple of levels, you'll be fighting chaff like kobolds and zombies, but you'll eventually depart the sewer system and end up in some dwarven caves. Here you start fighting things like giant spiders, and you are not prepared. You won't learn neutralize poison for a couple more experience levels, and cure poison potions are very rare. And let me tell you, poison in D&D isn't a slight annoyance like it is in games like Final Fantasy or whatever. You are going to be constantly taking big handfuls of poison damage constantly. And if you rest when poisoned, well, you're going to be passing time much quicker, and the poison character or characters straight up die. Speaking of dying, and getting back to our previously mentioned Bone Boys, once you get to the Dwarven camp 5 levels down, you get some story, and you get your resurrection dude. Story-wise, well, the dwarf leader Kiergar has been captured by the Drow, and the Drow are doing bad stuff. The dwarves want you to help. Okay, I mean, it's a video game and you need something to do, so okay. After you agree to go find the prince and also find a way to awaken the sleeping king, you get a kinda okay dwarven fighter as a team member, bringing you up to 5 teammates. The dwarven town, village, camp, cave also has a powerful cleric who can resurrect your dead. This is where those bones can be brought back to life. So you can resurrect some bones now, and you are up to 6 party members. Having 6 party members is great because, dude, you have very limited inventory space. You have lots of slots for equipment, but your backpack is very small. You get a slot for a weapon or other item in your main hand, your offhand, a slot for a helmet, a slot for an amulet, 2 slots for rings, a slot for boots, 3 slots for your belts, and a slot for arrows. This is just for arrows, though. If you have a sling, you can only carry a couple of stones in your belt. Sorry, sling users. Pour one out for the sling boys. So your backpack only holds 14 things, and you will find a lot of things. You will find weapons, armor, rings, amulets, potions, rations, the aforementioned bones, quest items, teleporter items, and much more. And nothing stacks. You are going to need to be very careful with what you bring and what you leave behind. My suggestion is try to leave unwanted items near the beginning or end of a level. This way, if you need to backtrack, you'll have a pile of things ready to dig through. I'm extra OCD, so I always divide everything up into neat little piles. Some of the items you find are stone items. These are essentially fast travel items, although some of them are not very useful at all. As you traverse the dungeon, you'll find the occasional stone inlay on a wall. This inlay looks like a kind of gate with some item carvings all around it. Each gate will be missing one carving, and if you have the matching stone item, it will teleport you to another part of the dungeon. The problem here is that a lot of the places they teleport you to are not very helpful. Some of them will teleport you back up the dungeon like 3 or 4 levels. Some will teleport you to spots in the dungeon that are way off the beaten path. In theory, these sound helpful, but really only the necklace will be helpful because it will bring you back from the Drow ruins to the dwarf area. Thanks guys, thanks a lot. Speaking of the Drow, you'll eventually bump into Shindia, an elite Drow warrior. Now, despite the fact that she's an elite Drow warrior, she kinda begs for her life. She says that if you release her, she'll give you information on what's happening. It turns out that the Drow are massing to attack the dwarves for invading their part of the underground. She also tells you that Kiergar is nearby and ready to be rescued. She then disappears, because of course she does. Now, you can potentially fuck this up and kill her, which I think stops this side quest in its tracks, and since there's really only the one side quest in the game, you probably don't want to mess it up. You will eventually find Kiergar in shackles down in the Mantis warrior part of the dungeon. These Thri-Kreen Mantis warriors pretty much paralyze you every chance they hit you, so make sure your cleric has cure paralysis. You then bring Kiergar back to the dwarf camp and everyone is happy, but the king is still asleep, alas. You're pretty much now at the end of the game. A little exploration will net you the Potion of Dwarven Cure, or something similarly named, and you bring this back to the dwarven camp and wake up the king. He then tells you what is really going down in Underground Town. The events of the story have been masterminded by a powerful beholder named Xanathar. He wants all of the dungeon for himself and has tricked the Drow into wanting to kill the dwarves, and has tricked the dwarves into wanting to kill the Drow. Xanathar kidnapped Kiergar and put the king to sleep, and he is also the one who manipulated the Drow into thinking that the dwarves want their territory. And yeah, it's called Eye of the Beholder because beholders have a lot of eyes. I'll give you a minute to take that in. Are you good? Okay. The king then gives you the Wand of Slivius, forged from a beholder's eye stalk, which can be used against Xanathar. So you head out and dungeon crawl all the way down to level 12, Xanathar's domain. After floors and floors of big nasty things trying to kill you, Xanathar's home base is a little bit sparse. It's not as big as the other floors and only has one type of enemy, some golems. And other than having loads of HP, they're not really that tough at all. There is one really nasty trap down here though. Most traps in the game involve you getting blasted with fireballs or falling into holes, normal everyday stuff. But there is one trap here that will steal your items if you interact with it. You will eventually find some pedestals with items on them, but when you try to pick up these items, you will lose one of the items in your inventory. I basically had to spend a good 10 minutes constantly picking up my stolen gear, only for more of it to be stolen away. This sucked, and it was a task to waste my time. I would have preferred to have been blasted by another fireball, but instead I had my time wasted. This was seriously lame. You'll eventually find Xanathar and have a real bad time. With the Wand of Slivius, you won't actually need to fight him. You can use the wand to repel him backwards. So all you need to do is kite him around his lair until he gets pushed back into a bed of spikes, where the ceiling will fall down, crushing him. But this whole time, he's doing beholder stuff. Beholders have a lot of spells, and sometimes they will hit you with some mundane spells, like cause serious wounds or paralysis. Sometimes you will get hit by Disintegrate or Death Spell. spells that immediately kill one or more of your dudes. This makes an easy battle a bit less easy. It's fun, but it's difficult, that's for sure. I don't know what'll happen if you skip the quest to rescue the king, but I imagine a face-to-face war of attrition against this asshole would not be fun. So you win, and after a giant screen of text explaining that you got out of the dungeon and your heroes, you get cold booted to DOS. Thanks, old games. Eye of the Beholder stands the test of time. It's still as fun today as it was a million years ago. Remember the early 90s? I do, unfortunately. This is a simple but very well done first-person dungeon crawler. Combat is fun, character management is in-depth, and the dungeon is fantastic. The layout, monster placement, trap placement, hidden areas are all super well done. Even on this, my 6th or 7th playthrough, I found new stuff. New gear, new weapons, new areas. It is a big sprawling game with a lot to find tucked away. The story is a little bit sparse, but it's a pretty unique tale. It's not a quest to kill God. You are fighting against a single beholder in a single dungeon under a single town. The story is sparse, but there is enough there to remain interesting. And I mean, it's a dungeon crawler. Out of all of the various RPG flavors, this might be the subgenre that needs the least amount of story. My biggest complaint is the very sparse music, especially considering Yuzo Koshiro did such a killer job with the Sega CD version. The lack of music and minimal sounds make the aural landscape way too bland. It's like you're listening to algae grow in a rock. Anyway, Eye of the Beholder, 11 out of 10. Thanks Aaron, thanks Vexy, hug a cat, goodbye.